Call to order December 17th, 2024, meeting of the North Andover Planning Board. Jean, can you take a roll?
Kate Kelly. Here. Sean Kevlin.
Here.
Eitan Goberg.
I'm here.
Peter Boynton.
Aye.
John Simons.
Here.
Okay, no public hearings today, just some discussion items, so let's jump right in. Master Plan Implementation Committee Biannual Progress Report. I turn now to our ad hoc member of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Sean, why don't you tell us about what's going on?
Yeah, so this is a biannual progress report. Basically twice a year we just update the select board and the planning board on kind of what we've been doing and tracking on kind of master plan implementation and just how the master plan is going. And so in each, just the level set everyone for each meeting, we kind of go through the different strategies and then kind of review what strategies have been updated. And so Andrew has done a fantastic job of outlining the website, and then as things update and fits within the master plan, we color code things on things that just recently updated are green, and it's actually going pretty well. So we've gone through since last year's MBTA Communities Act approval at town meeting. We just kind of aligned a lot of different strategies that we hit, like a couple land use strategies, like strategy 1, 3, and 4, which was Osgood Growth Overlay District, and then reviewing some of the zoning changes as well as some of the zoning bylaws. We also, tied into some of the MBTA Communities Act with some of the housing strategies like 11, 15, and 18 that showed growth, and then supporting new housing development and infrastructure, and as well as economic development for strategy 21 and 25 to encourage mixed-use buildings and commercial and industrial land use. So, and this all tied into kind of the MBTA Communities Act. There's been also going down. We've updated some housing plans, as you can see in Strategy 10 for the housing production update, and as well as we've been reviewing some of the obviously the accessory dwelling unit bylaws that we're starting to talk about and how that actually fits in with the master plan. And so one of the big things that we're going to start to review and come up with recommendations of what we're discussing right now is whether or not to do like master plan implementation usually gives a recommendation for any zoning bylaws on how it actually fits within the master plan. And so John Strauss is thinking that we do the same exercise for the ADU bylaw, just how it fits within the master plan, even though it's something that's kicked down by the state. So that's something that we're discussing at the moment.
The ADU is specifically called out in the master plan. I mean,
Yep.
I know it hits multiple things, but
Yeah.
it's literally one of the items.
Yeah, it's one of the housing. Yeah, it's one of the strategies. But I think it's one of the big things that as the Master Plan Implementation Committee likes to do is just making sure that at town meeting that someone like John would say, hey, we reviewed this, the ADU bylaw fits within the master plan, this is where it fits in within the master plan that we drafted, and kind of tie out the strategies that we're bringing to the ADU bylaw. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's good in the sense too that, part of what we're doing is because it is the state legislation, but also it's nice to kind of think back, kind of macro that we're not just doing it because of that it also does further other goals of the town.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. So just kind of jumping around. So Gene, we can, I think you can go down to strategy 41.
Can I ask about 33?
Yep. Sure. Yeah.
Who in the town is working with KMA Design?
That's a good question. I don't know, Gene.
Planning
Yeah.
and Andrew, economic development.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that we went through a process to put up the signs for entering watershed.
Yeah.
Yep.
But when I see the wayfinding master plan, is it possible to work into that wayfinding, anything they think might be appropriate
Yeah,
for?
Yep, they've looked at those.
Great.
They took pictures when they drove around the town, so they're
Okay.
going to propose an update to that.
Good, okay, thanks.
Never heard that term before.
Yeah, making sure we have signage and, yeah, that you know
okay.
what area of town you're in, yeah. One of the big things too,
So you don't get lost.
yeah, exactly.
Well, it's more actually usually used for like, to actually help with tourism and people going to town. So usually you see, like, I remember when I was in Beverly doing, like, where parking lots are and things like that, so that when you go into, let's say you're coming into town and you're going to a restaurant, well, you know where the parking lot is, so you're not just stopping and causing traffic and things like that. It's a way to make it, your trips into places in the town more livable, functional, and therefore kind of making it better for everybody.
It's more destination oriented
Right.
for our town, so it'll get you to the old center, and then within the old center, it'll point to Stevens Coolidge and the First Burial Ground and
Exactly.
Parson Barnett House and things like that. Warrior Hill Trails signage, things like
Milton Mill.
that. Milton Hill.
Yep.
Right.
Hills
And,
and
and another way
Hills
to
to
just
hills, yep.
recognize what we have. And, oh, why don't I go see that, or things like that.
And then some other ones, if you go to Strategy 41, so if you guys remember, there was a pretty big MassDOT Complete Streets grant that we got in '22, and that actually just got completed in this summer. Just specifically, if the intersection of Chadwick Street and High Street was a big part of that and realignment. Another one in 57, the MEVA route. There's been a, in 2024 in May, there was a $1.9 million grant that was awarded, looking at service routes. But also one big thing that is kind of building off of that is going back to the wayfinding piece, is like actually like demarcating like where the bus can actually pick you up and things like that. So it's something that they're also kind of looking into as well.
Do we have statistics on like who rides the bus?
So Andrew brought up, there was actually an interesting comment that, because since MEVA went gratis or free, there's been a huge uptick in ridership.
That's what I was
Yeah,
wondering.
yeah. It's actually, and I don't have the numbers offhand, but I don't know if Gene, you do, but like, it's actually, it's a meaningful uptick in ridership.
I can get them.
Yeah.
I mean,
But-
I
but the-
remember when I used to see the morning when I go to the train station, there was never a person on the train.
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
bus.
Yep.
Not a single person.
Yeah. And I think this is all, they were able to do it because of the COVID relief funding, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep. The important thing here is, so Amazon put that, they did a modification to put the
Yep.
bus stop on their
Yeah.
property, and initially that was just gonna circle back to Haverhill. It now goes down 125 past Princeton, it stops at the senior center, and it goes to Lawrence train station. So,
Yep.
that's a big win.
So just jumping around, so strategy 85, there's obviously a big CapEx and capital improvement plan that was approved, like the facilities master plan 2, and that was approved at the May 2024 town meeting. And so that obviously fits within our strategy to update and repair a lot of our town buildings as well as our school system. There was a strategy 87, there was a grant awarded to work on broadband. I don't know, Gene, if you have any more color on that. I mean, this is actually one that I might have missed that particular meeting, but
Yeah, so it's a digital equity plan, and it's looking at where there's gaps. And so a lot of time was focused with the library, the youth center, the school department, the senior center. A survey was conducted, and a gap analysis was done. So that we're close to finalizing this plan now. And that puts us in position for grant funding right away. So
Yep.
we anticipate presenting the final plan to the select board in the month of January.
And then the last piece of this letter is that so Brian Roach championed a kind of a riverfront zoning overlay district over close to the Merrimack River to try to spark up some commercial use down there, and so it's basically if you go over the tracks behind where the old I don't know what pizza place it is now, but where Upper Crust was, back kind of near Ferry Street, that's kind of where they're thinking like
It's
would
all
be,
residential back there.
yeah.
So I think Brian's idea is to encourage that might not be the best potential use of that area, so it would have to be up to someone, if you did an overlay, to
To combine
buy
all
out those
yeah.
residences and do something.
He's kind of getting ahead of himself there, isn't
It-
it? Shouldn't that start with us? I mean,
I
not
think-
that I really care from an
I-
overall perspective,
yeah.
but I mean, I remember some of the history of that, 20 years ago. People
Yeah.
wanted to do stuff down there.
So
I don't know, with all the riparian rights and everything, I don't think you're gonna be able to get any kind of commercial development.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something. Again, this is something that's championed by the select board and what Brian wanted to do in terms of a goal to look at and review whether or not something's potential down there and to craft something.
Well, they're not
potentially an
planning
overlay.
on doing something this year, are they?
No.
No.
I think this is more. So I talked to
That's
Brian
fine,
about
I
it. I think it was more of he's trying to identify locations in town where something like this, a lot of towns near us have things built up on the river, and it's kind of an attraction, and we have very little location that we could do this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's feasible there. I talked to him about, with the airport, with other
Yeah.
stuff, with flooding. It could be tough, but it's at least worth looking at. But I would definitely, if you know, John, some history of that, definitely talk with him about
I
that.
see where you're going. It's just the problem is you got access in, but you don't have access out. It's not a two-way access out, so
Yeah.
that creates a certain amount of a problem there.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe. I mean, I would just be concerned of what's the topography like. Is there a flooding issue there potentially?
Yep.
Just
Yeah.
how much room are we
I
even
think there's
talking about?
and when I talked to Brian about this, I told him that we probably have a lot more questions on what to do there.
Yeah.
Especially with the airport. If you guys remember that one meeting where the GM of the airport came in and identified
Yeah.
potential kind of eminent domain opportunities for the airport because of the flight path and the safety cones. I can't remember what.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
No, I
think
don't-
there's
I don't-
Money for
yeah.
that. But I do think more broadly put, I still think the airport is a grossly underutilized asset.
Oh yeah.
But to that point, I think what I really like about this is that someone is trying to preemptively think about
No, that's
not just
you're right.
not
yeah.
just developers coming to us and saying here's what we want to do, but thinking about where in town could we potentially do things and exploring it. And
Yeah.
it may work, it may not work, it may be a 5 or 10 year thing before you might have to zone it and then get project. It might, but it's good to see, especially town leaders, kind of
Yeah.
coming with ideas of how can we, and asking questions, how can we do this better, and what can we do, and then
Yeah.
seeing what works.
Because it is a little bit like on an island over there, not on a physical
Oh,
island,
no,
but
I-
what
yeah,
I
I
mean?
know what you mean. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think, back to Eitan's
But then
point is-
again, there's other areas that, like over, you remember, like where the Mercury Shoe Outlet used to be? Is that
Green
Green
Street,
Street?
the
Yeah,
lower
that's
end of
Green
Green.
Street. Over there, there's a lot of waterfront property over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I think maybe, with the select board, it's the goal to identify a riverfront overlay district. Not that it's
Yeah.
going to be there, right? Maybe that's the initial idea, but we might just say, there's going to be some sort of collaboration that we just say maybe it's better to fit, to your point, on Green Street, right?
Yeah.
That can drive a little more kind of commercial opportunities and people down there. So, but yeah, it's something being kicked around. It's one of their goals up until fiscal 26 to kind of
Yeah.
kick that around. And it fits within our strategies too, between 2-4 with land use, and then 20 and 62 for economic development and open space. So, and then one other thing that I think wasn't on here, just to give you guys an update, Andrew, I think at some point had to come in and give a presentation. So there was we were awarded a grant to study an MBTA stop behind Osgood and Amazon. And I think that, Gina, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's done, more or less, or nearly complete.
More or less, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very close.
Yeah, so I asked Andrew to come in and just present its findings, because obviously like having a T-stop, like potentially, and then cost and implications, and plays into a lot of commercial traffic, and, you know, within our purview, I think it'd be good to just understand how that study went, whether or not something feasible, and kind of get a pulse there, so.
So there's, I know that the T has a right-of-way back there. Are there any public roads that go back there, or
Not public roads.
that's a challenge?
Why was
Okay.
this- Why was the station closed on Sutton Street? I mean, this was 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, the report actually details that. And I was surprised, it was 74 that it closed, and the B&M Railroad started going bankrupt, and the state was funding it, and the ridership was incredibly low,
Yeah.
and so they closed
Didn't
several of
There
them.
used to be two tracks, and they cut one track out, like around 1974, I think,
There's,
to
there's
Boston.
there's
Yeah.
a section north of Reading that still is only one track,
Yeah.
and that's one of the problems, is they'd
Yeah.
have to go to 2 tracks to add
Yeah.
another station up here.
Yeah,
But it was like 78 when the state bought them out and reopened some stations.
Yeah,
But, yeah, it's all detailed in the report, though.
but,
Interesting.
but there's like a, you know, we're talking, you know, to Andrew about this, it's like if this turns into an opportunity that makes financial and commercial sense, so that's a big if, right? Is that I think we would have to work with the state, or someone has to go to the state and say, because especially with the MBTA Communities Act, like, we would have to get some sort of, like, because if we implement a new station, technically it would not be was it an adjacent
Oh,
community?
did that change our
Oh.
status?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's an open question.
Yeah.
We don't know that if that would
Yeah.
change or not.
I don't know that,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. I don't know that it would, and we have,
I mean, assuming you can get access to it, I think the biggest impediment is gonna be that those things are really expensive.
oh, yeah.
I mean, they're like $50 or $100 million. It's insane how expensive they are. I don't
Projection is
understand.
$58 million
Yeah.
To build the station?
that the state would
Yeah,
pay for, yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it'd be a long process. We'd need a great deal of regional support to even,
yeah.
Yeah, and they would have to,
Have
they would
this.
probably have to shut down a station too, right?
Because, I mean, the Haverhill station has been closed down for a long time. It's been close to a year now. And the train stopped in Bradford, and then you can take a bus to Haverhill. But I don't know when they're gonna finish it, but it's not done yet. That's, you know, the existing station there in Haverhill.
Yeah,
okay,
so,
great. Alright.
yeah, that's it, you know, so,
And just on the MBTA communities, I don't know if everyone got notification that our bylaw was approved through the Attorney General and approved with the inclusionary zoning that we had proposed, because they had to do a financial analysis to make sure it was financially sound, and it was. So that was good, pleasing news. Okay, let's move on. Historic Barn Overlay District Draft Bylaw Amendment. Peter, you don't have to recuse yourself.
so this is really a housekeeping article based on the Attorney General's feedback of the review of the bylaw. The first concern expressed was in 195-20.2. Our language reads the name of the map and then says attached and made part of this article, but the map itself was not printed in the warrant, and so housekeeping, the boundaries of it become a zoning bylaw map as opposed to an historic district map. And so housekeeping, we're just gonna include that in a warrant article this year. And second, for the information required section, the language had the application being delivered to the planning department for review of completeness, and then planning would have it timestamped in the clerk's office. They cited Mass General Law that the applicant itself, him or herself, needs to deliver it to the clerk's office, and so this revised language would get 3 copies timestamped, 2 of which would then be forthwith filed with the planning department by the petitioner. Kate pointed out today, I use applicant in the first sentence and later it's petitioner, so I will revise it to be petitioner in both places.
Okay.
You've got to be kidding me, but thank you.
Yeah.
It
Details.
is what it is.
Value add.
But one of the reasons,
Should be happy.
well, one of the reasons why all our bylaws are severable, meaning that if one part is found to not be legal, it doesn't invalidate the whole bylaw. So the whole bylaw still exists, we just have to change that small part. Legal drafting is not easy for legislation. Floodplain district bylaw.
All right, this is very similar. We had an article, I think, just last year. This is the National Flood Insurance Act of '68. They've recommended amendments again. So Amy provided a whole cover letter in your packet. Essentially, the revisions are really taking out areas that, oh, sorry, the wrong one. So there's zones, there's a number of zones, but the edits are deleting AHAO, A99, V, and VE, and it's because they don't exist in North Andover. So you can see all of that is lined out. The only concern I have right now is we reference the date of the maps, which are anticipated to be in either June or July of this year. But we don't know yet, and I'm not sure we're gonna know exactly date prior to town meeting. So Amy's gonna try to get some direction as to whether we can cite just the month of June or the month of July, if and when they know exactly which month it'll occur in. And that's the only outstanding concern. Everything else is really deletions. And
Okay.
it's all just to keep us consistent with state and federal language. Okay, you wanna do accessory dwellings?
Yep.
or-
No, let's keep it accessory dwellings, family suite, limited site plan. I mean, whatever order you think is best.
All right, so accessory dwelling, we've seen this a number of times. The
So-
guidance has since come out.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna. So we did get, there was some state guidance that came out. Was everyone given a copy of it? Yes. Okay, so definitely, I think we were kind of spot on a bunch of things, and then a bunch of the questions that we had have been answered, and then a bunch are still up for grabs. So like Sean, utilities, still don't have any answers on that.
All right.
But we do have answers that we can't limit ADUs to single-family dwellings.
Really?
We cannot. It's very specific in here and in on the seminars afterwards that it applies to anything in a single-family district, and that can be a single-family dwelling, a multi-family dwelling, a two-family dwelling. It can be any of those. We don't have a choice on that. So here is the definition of a principal dwelling. Structure regardless whether it conforms with zoning, including use and dimensional requirements such as setbacks, bulk heights. It contains at least one dwelling unit and is located on the same lot as a protected use ADU.
So it can be a 1, 2, or a multifamily. They're very explicit in all their presentations.
Did they give any guidance on, is it one ADU per dwelling, or is it per unit,
You can-
or
We
Well-
can restrict 1 ADU per lot.
per lot? Okay.
So if we wanted to allow for more than one, it would have to be by special permit.
Yep.
But their interpretation is if we choose to restrict it to 1 per lot, we can. And that's how we've crafted the bylaw.
So we've done two things. We've done two things in regard to that. One, we've restricted it to one ADU per lot, and as Gina and I drafted the bylaw, what we did is we made it, if you want to do an ADU on anything greater than a single family, we did it by limited site plan review, so at least it would have some review. If you're doing a detached ADU. Detached, limited site plan review. If you're doing an ADU and this is, again, for discussion, but we did it, if you're doing an ADU on anything that's greater than a single family, limited site plan. If you're doing it attached or within ADU on a single family, it's by right. That's kind of the compromise that we came up with, based on what we think was allowed.
And Chair, just I guess so I understand the hierarchy here. So these are that's currently draft rules. They're going to be, comment is going to be accepted, or not.
Yes, these are
The
draft guidelines.
Guidelines.
They're
but
accepting comments.
And they will be, but they will be enforceable and have preemptive authority over anything we do at the local level.
Correct. They will become part of the CMRs, the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, I believe.
Yes.
And that has the effect of law. It's basically interpretation of the law. So basically, the law says that the AG or EOHLC can establish guidelines, and those guidelines have the effect of law. So yes.
But we won't know what the final guideline, which doesn't sound as regulatory as a rule, but okay, guideline, we won't know what they look like until,
They said they're gonna promulgate by February 2nd, which is when the law goes into effect. That's a Sunday. Our public hearing opens on February 4th, 2 days later. And so when that public hearing, we can still make amendments to whatever the draft is, all the way up until town meeting. I would hope that they're not necessarily considered material edits, that they're housekeeping based on the regulations, so that if town meeting were to pass this bylaw, it really, anybody that pulls a building permit after February 2nd is still subject to the bylaw.
So we should have, before we vote on it at town meeting, we should have them. And we should have them for our public hearing process.
is there a possibility that they'll be legally challenged somehow, or that, does that happen?
Yeah.
That they'll be hung up?
No, they are legal challenges to guidelines and whether or not guidelines are enforceable. Like there was similar, I think, sometimes with the MBTA Act, but that's usually after the fact. Yeah, I couldn't imagine a preliminary injunction or anything like that would stop these from going into effect. They may be challenged after the fact, but not going into effect. I'm not sure what the challenge would be, other than maybe state overstepping local zoning, but I think they're allowed to under 40A.
But we can expect significant public comment, like from associations and stuff like that on these?
I would expect there'll be certainly public comment. The public comment period opens on the 20th and it closes January 10th.
It's rare that they make significant changes. It's more usually like kind of minor alterations and sometimes taking up some of the stuff that, like, they don't have an answer on the utilities. So they may take a lot of comments on the utility issue and then put in further guidance. I think a lot of this stuff is gonna stay as it is. They may wordsmith a bunch, but they usually don't make significant changes.
I'm surprised that the multifamily, because like the whole legislation was written in the spirit of single family, but now they just kind of broaden it.
Well, but the legislature, I think that was I think that's the traditional consideration and idea of ADUs, but if you look at the statutory language, it is super broad.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say otherwise. So if you're making guidelines based on the statutory language, I can understand it, but there's no, like, there was very little, at least in the legislative history, about what was actually being thought. So I get it. It doesn't really make sense to me as planning perspective for accessory dwelling units, but I think one of the things we can think about is that, okay, like a multifamily, like at a big apartment complex, you're not gonna build an ADU because what's the point? You can just build another apartment, you know, for the most part. Now, I guess I don't know if, like, let's say someone was permitted for 180 units. Could they now do 181 because one of them could be an accessory? accessory dwelling unit? I guess so.
It seems that if they can comply with
Yeah,
the protected.
Right.
use.
seems like it.
But they couldn't, based on our bylaw, do more than one on that lot. So it's not getting you, so if you have a big multifamily, it's not getting you a lot, so I don't
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
The,
Well, where it's going to have an impact, and the problem is it could have a adverse impact is you got a duplex, or
Right.
you got a 3 or a 4, and you try to jam in something that
right,
it's
So-
just, the property can't tolerate it.
so it still has to meet setbacks.
Yeah.
So you can't expand too
Yeah.
much, especially, right, if we're talking downtown, if we're talking, Middlesex Street or Library District or Marblehead, those are pretty small lots to start with, so we
Yeah.
have some protection there. But you're right, I mean, I was talking with Gene beforehand, if someone wants to convert an attic or a basement or a garage in one of those and it's coming from a 2 to a 3, I agree, I think that's that's gonna be the biggest potential, I don't wanna say headache, but cause of consternation.
Will a single-family residence that adds an ADU to the same structure, will that structure then meet the definition of a multifamily?
No. No, it is a single family with an accessory, with a, accessory dwelling unit attached.
And, I mean, I'm thinking about the parking too, is that, so I know that if it's, what, a half a mile from a bus stop?
Well, unfortunately, the way and the guidelines are defining it is like basically a bus stop or anywhere you can stop to get on the bus. So if you can flag down the bus because it's passing by and it's allowed, that counts too.
Really?
Yep. We have 2 routes in town that are flag stops,
So,
so a half mile from that route in either side
So-
of the street.
it's,
I don't think we have to change the language in here. It's going to be an execution issue during permitting.
it's problematic.
That is-
I will say.
They encourage comments on that, though.
So yes, I think I think we should.
They understand that it could be challenging but they want, so what do you propose?
Yeah.
Like, they
Well, the
want-
challenge is like Neva's effectively one big flag stop, right? I think like I think you can hail, if you see the bus, you can
They-
literally raise your hand
They
and pick
have
you up.
some no-stop locations
Yeah.
on each of those routes, but they're minor compared
Yeah.
to the length of the route.
Yeah,
And then, John, to your point though, that is why Gina and I talked about it and are suggesting putting, if it's gonna be on a duplex, to at least put it through site plan
Yeah.
review.
yeah.
I mean, it's limited, so it's not discretionary in the sense, but if it really doesn't work, we can adjust it, and make sure that neighbors are heard and things like that. Because I think on the duplexes especially, it has the most potential impact because you could have 2 separate owners, one be very in favor of it, one not be in favor of it, and that's a significant tension point. If you're doing it on a single family house, well then, your neighbors have a lot less, they don't live right next, they're not literally on top of you, so they have a lot less say.
Yeah. But, I mean, in a duplex, effectively duplexes operate as effectively as a condo, right?
Some do, some don't. So not necessarily.
Yeah.
I could own a 2-family and one of them's rented to one person, one of them's rented to the one person, and I'm the owner and I
Yeah.
just rent them both out. So they're just
Yeah.
both my apartments and those people act independently.
Yeah.
They're duplexes that are each owned individually and then have a condo association.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of different ownership models. So that one would be tricky, like who gets to do it.
Yeah.
So there are different models.
That's fun.
Yep. All right, so what other changes do we have, Gene?
All right, so, the definitions, so now I've pulled them all into the ADU bylaw, only the ones that are applicable to us, so the regulations have more definitions than we would need to incorporate.
And we've taken the definitions from the state guidelines.
Yep, so things like gross floor area, they're using the state building code calculation for that, and that's what, we're just using the same one. So now there's a lot of definitions where there weren't before. So applicability, we've gone back and forth on this, but I revised it back to principal dwelling rather than a single family on a residential lot. So it has to be principal dwelling. The application I took out, the application, whether it's going to be the building inspector that administers it, he's gonna have his own application for people to apply for. Ours will be in the application for limited site plan review. I'm just gonna modify that application to be applicable to ADUs. So I took that whole section out. General requirements, again, most of this was put back to principal dwelling. I added to the watershed special permit requirement, review by a historic district authority, because the guidelines came out saying that if you have, I think it's Mass Chapter 60, I'm not positive, but our Old Center District and Machine Shop Village District will still, you'll have to go for their review to make sure that you meet their guidelines as well.
There was in the guidelines, part that said you can't, talking about restrictions to, modular homes and pre-manufactured homes, but it really wasn't clear why they were making a distinction.
Distinction between them.
So that's still to be figured out. But again, it seemed pretty clear that they want towns not to be able to say no trailers or things like that. We won't be able to say it has to meet the same architecture and character and stuff like that, that all of those are not allowed as requirements.
So on K, we softened it a little bit, that maintain the architectural character and be compatible with the design standards of, and design standards is a defined term, design standards of the principal dwelling where possible and practical. And then for the use, dimensional, and physical requirements, they have to comply with setbacks. And then again, we softened language saying it is recommended where possible and practical that any new separate outside entrance be located to the side or rear of the building and located so that visibility from the public way is minimized or may be shared entry hall. I did learn today that they thought it is a reasonable condition to not have the staircase seen from the public way. And so if you wanted me to put that in, they felt that was reasonable, which they shared today. They also
Hold on,
thought,
so let's talk about that. What do we think about that? Do we care if the outside staircases and such are viewable from the public way?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just aesthetically very pleasing.
So how about this then? So how about we say that, but have it waivable, because there may be a situation where it is okay and looks okay, or there's already a staircase, or that's the only kind of safe egress or something like that. So let's put it in as a requirement, but then make it waivable.
okay. They also today communicated that a roof pitch must, they gave a, for a design standard example that they felt was reasonable, was that a roof pitch must be no less than 9/12, which would prevent having flat roofs in town. And they felt that was reasonable design standard as well.
Do we have any design standards like that anywhere?
Not for the pitch of a roof, but
Yeah.
it's, like I said, it just prevents flat roofs. I can't think of a flat roof in town.
Well, what if you did a trailer?
And it would be a flat roof.
That's tricky. I think we leave that one alone.
Okay. Okay. So then, again, just softening language, it's recommended where possible and practical that in the case of an attached ADU, all stairways to the second or third stories be enclosed within the exterior walls of the dwelling. So again, it's not mandated, but requesting when possible. All right, and I already explained in E, the bus stop issue is, we are a flag stop location. And so now this is special requirements for detached ADUs and/or accessory dwelling units proposed on a lot that contains a two-family or a multifamily principal dwelling. So that's whether it's attached or detached. So we still allow for waiving of the curb cuts. No new, no new curb cut, but it is waivable. Again, no new ADU to be located in the front yard. If the structure is already there, it is waivable to add an ADU to it. And then we struck the detached ADU will maintain a compatible relationship to improvements in the adjacent lots. We just thought that was a stretch and not a reasonable requirement. And then the detached ADU will not result in excessive noise, traffic, or parking congestion. Again, single-family homes, we don't bring any of that criteria into it. And then I moved the waiver provision from above to down here. So now, if the planning board's gonna waive it, they're gonna make the following findings, which is A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, any of those findings. Other requirements is just no CO or building permit can be issued unless it's in compliance with this bylaw. If an ADU is discontinued, the owner shall notify the enforcement officer because the regulations do require annual reporting. So we have to report how many ADUs, building permits were issued, how many COs were issued to the state. And then enforcement falls under the building inspector. He can issue a cease and desist if they're operating without compliance with this bylaw.
We still have the no short-term rental in there, right?
Yep. And then if there is an accessory dwelling unit that's not in compliance with this bylaw, so it could be a family suite that no longer has the occupant being the one that received the special permit, then this gives them a year to bring that ADU into compliance and does not have any fees through the building department while it is a non-conforming structure. So pre-existing ADUs over 900 square feet that no longer are in compliance with their special permit need to be brought into compliance with the ADU bylaw. And then within the same warrant article, I carried in the updating the dimension, the table of use to add accessory dwelling units. So that's all one bylaw.
Okay.
Limited site plan review is in the same state that you've seen it in the past. All it does is bring detached accessory dwelling units into limited site plan review. And then Article 4, this is the most changed since you last saw them. So you had suggested that maybe sunset the family suite bylaw and definition. I didn't use a date, but what that would do is in Article 4, which is permitted uses in buildings, Part 2 is residence 1, 2, and 3. Family suites are an allowed use, and this 1 through 3 are the criteria. I added 4, expiration, the provision of this section, 4.2Q, shall expire on July 1 of whatever year
We
you
have
decide.
Anyone have a suggestion for how long to sunset it? I mean, I thought it was 3 years, but I'm not married to that. 2 years, 4 years, 3 years. You know, 3 seems fine.
That's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's do 27.
Trying to remember what year we're in, yeah? No,
What?
we're gonna be in 25, so
Yeah,
28.
so we
Oh,
July
28,
1.
yeah, you're right. 28, thank you.
Resident 4 district permitted uses is a V, and it's the exact same as what you just reviewed, and I added number 4 again, the same language. And then the definition section, which is Article 2, has a definition for family suite, and I added the same expiration, the family suite definition shall expire on July 1, 23.
So 28 for all of those, okay.
28, sorry.
Yep.
So that's it.
Okay. Okay, so next steps in the process, Gene? When do we do the public, when do we do the notices?
So the legal ad will go to the Tribune mid-January. It'll post twice in January for a hearing opening date of February 4th.
Okay.
So at this point, I'm gonna accept all these red line edits and
Accept
start.
all, Yep.
and
Yep.
start fresh at that point.
Mhm.
So we meet January 7th. I don't think there'll be a lot to talk about, other than if we get any change to the guidelines.
Yeah, you can leave it on, but I wouldn't anticipate talking about it unless there's some new change to the guidelines or new information.
I'll
that you've
try to get
received.
some time with town council too, because this has changed pretty dramatically since we last met.
Yeah. Should we wait until we get guidelines on the utility piece for detached structures to add language, or start proposing language and then taking it out? What do you think?
I would wait because have they expressed any intent to actually say anything about
Utilities?
utilities?
Yeah,
I mean, I know the question keeps coming up, but I don't know that,
Yeah, I mean,
I think we'd be just shooting in the dark. That's the
yeah,
problem.
I mean, because there's just so many questions that I have on the utility side, because like you can do it a lot of different ways for detached structures. You can run all the utilities at the primary structure, right? Or you run all the utilities directly to the ADU. And I guess my question, especially like on lots that are on town water and sewer, like, I mean, is there, like, I don't know, like, when you get a new, like, sewer stub or water stub, like, do we have to dig up the streets? Like, and I'm afraid that, like, again, in an unlikely scenario, everyone pulls an ADU permit, is now all the streets being dug up at the same time because everyone's doing direct connections of the ADU? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess we need some guidance on what would happen if, let's say someone wants to build a ADU in their backyard. What would, I mean, I don't know if we talk to a developer, talk to someone DPW, building commissioner, like what would actually be the,
I'll talk to DPW.
yeah, what would be the mechanism for that to happen in terms of utilities? What would be, is there a preferable, and in terms of like sewer connections and stuff like that, sewer water connections? I guess I'd like to know from the town what would be preferable. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I think that's the first question, is there a preferable option? If we don't have a preferable option, then I think we leave it. If we do, then maybe we can put it and
Yep.
change it if we have to. But I'd at least like to know what the preferable options would be.
So what the state has acknowledged today was other issues are addressing utility connections, separate or joint utility connections, especially water and sewer. So
Yep.
it's just still an open item.
Yeah, because I mean, again, I could see it, like, again, there is a scenario where, depending on where you're connecting the sewer, you're digging up the street, right? And again, and not that, I'm not advocating, for or against that, I'm just saying that's what would happen, right? And the question lies is that if we have a limited site plan review, and for utilities, then we can at least have a waiver function, right?
Is it in most cases, at least the electric and the cable, it's sort of a binary thing. It's either gonna be on those external poles,
Yep.
or if it's a subdivision built in the last 40 years.
It's gonna be underground.
Everything is underground,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, I guess what happens when someone, not that we have a lot of individual single-family houses built, but we get a split lot and someone builds a new single-family house, how do they attach?
Well, they attach directly to,
The
usually,
street?
like, if there's a pole, they
Right.
usually underground the utilities to the new structure, right? But I guess,
I don't know.
that's,
I guess it
Well,
depends.
my point is
Depending on
that
where they
if
are
it's
on the
on a
street.
subdivision, if it's on a subdivision street that's been built in the last 40 years, all the utilities are all underground anyway.
Yeah.
So it's going to have to be some variant of underground.
yep,
It's in situations where it's tied to something where it was always done by poles. That's where you could have, do
Yeah.
you run the pole directly to the house?
Yeah, exactly.
Or do you run it from the old house? I mean, that's.
yeah, and this is just the question I have on you, like, and this is where I think we'd use the limited site plan review function to look at utilities and then waive certain either undergrounding or something, just so we can at least have some control over it, because I could see that it can go
Yeah,
in a lot of different ways in that respect, right?
yeah.
I just don't know how much control the homeowner, like if you build an ADU, do you have a say in how National Grid
Well,
attaches?
so like, if you're gonna build a shed in your backyard and you wanted power to the shed, you would put a conduit from your primary structure to the shed, right? That would underground all the utilities to said shed, right?
Yeah,
So that's not dissimilar for what you're building ADU, is that you would drop a conduit either to the pole, right, underground, or to the primary structure. So I guess my question is that, like, does it for a detached, because it only pertains to a detached structure, because if it's attached, it's clearly going through the primary structure, right? If it's detached, you have now two options. You can run it through the primary structure of the building, the utilities, or you could run it directly from the mains, right? Either the gas main, the sewer main, the water main, or an electric pole, or a transformer, whatever. So,
I think their concern is making ADUs cost prohibitive.
yep,
And if you read in the regulations under, not prohibitive, but unreasonable regulations, everything they put there is references to the case law for Dover cases. And some of them are things like, there's no real clear benefit to the municipality, they're just requiring something to happen that doesn't really have an adverse effect on them, or
Yep.
cost prohibitive, things like that.
yep.
So I'd encourage you to read through those and see if what you're asking could be subject to one of those cautionary.
I think we should find out maybe what happens and maybe if there's a preference, but I'd be hesitant to put anything in unless we get something
Yeah,
from the
let's
state
talk
that
to
says it's
DPW
okay.
first.
Yeah.
Because
Because
I'm
I
not
don't think
sure.
it's necessarily digging up a whole street, I think they're just
Well, yeah,
tying it
again,
into a line.
and this is why it comes up, is that there's just so many questions around that,
Yeah,
right?
let's find out what
Yeah.
happens first, because we have family suites, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's been happening.
Yeah, no, but we don't have detached family suites, right? Or unless we do, did we?
We do.
Okay, yeah,
Right or wrong, we do. I
Okay.
know of a handful, so.
Well, people also build carriage houses
Right.
or
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
You know. Okay. All right, can we get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 26th and December 3rd?
so moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, anything before we adjourn for the year? Next meeting is January 7th, 2025. Nothing? Okay, everyone have a wonderful holiday. Can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.